Okay. Welcome and good evening. Just wait a moment to share our screens.
Attendees are coming in. I'm going to go ahead and share the Canva. So everyone can see it. All right. Everybody see it okay?
Yes. Okay, well, let's get started. Well, welcome and good evening, everyone, to Native Past, Presents, and Futures, a panel discussion and celebration of Native American and Indigenous Heritage Month. This is presented by the City of Hyattsville and the Race and Equity Task Force. I want to take a moment to start. I'll introduce myself. My name is Shakira Luamere, she, her, hers, and I am the staff liaison for the Race and Equity Task Force and Hyattsville's Race and Equity Officer. I just really want to thank our esteemed guests, panelists, city officials, staff that may be here, and especially residents and those of you who are joining us tonight. Before we get started with tonight's celebration, I just want to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. First, this meeting will be recorded and shared on the Hyattsville City website. And then second, please feel free to share any questions you may have in the Q&A comment box. If time permits, we welcome participants to come on camera and share your questions. If you do submit a question, please keep an eye out on your messages. Either I or Sherry Everhart, Deputy Director of Community Services, will confirm, if you're willing to ask your question, if time permits. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get into the agenda. We're going to start with a welcome and reading of the Native American and Indigenous Heritage Month proclamation by Ward 5 Councilmember Romel Sandino. Then we're going to move on to a poetry performance by Sue or Tesusetin, remarks by International Mayan League Executive Director Juanita Cabrera Lopez, then reflections on history and culture of Piscataway Indians. Then we're going to move on to the panel discussion and then the audience Q&A. Then we're going to close. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm very, very, very glad to pass it on to Ward 5 Councilmember Romel Sandino, who also serves as the council liaison for the Race and Equity Task Force. So glad to have you tonight. And Councilmember Sandino, please take the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Shakira. Good evening, everyone. My name is Romel Sandino. My pronouns are he, him, in. Council member for Ward 5. And I'm just honored to be in this space with my fellow colleagues and friends, celebrating the contributions, the legacy, the life, and the present and future with Native Americans, First Nations in this country. And before I read the proclamation, I do want to recognize the stolen lands upon which we are in and occupy. Right, and we will be hearing from our esteemed guests that are joining us tonight from the Piscataway Nation, on which lands we occupy. But I also want to recognize that First Nations, Native American nations also go beyond boundaries. And as an immigrant that came to this country when I was a child because of war, right, and climate disasters, I also want to honor the indigenous blood that runs in my veins, coming from Central America, from a small country called Nicaragua. But I'm honored tonight on behalf of the mayor and my fellow council colleagues to be able to read the proclamation declaring November 2022 as Native American Heritage Month in the city of Hyattsville. Native American Heritage Month, also known as American Indian Heritage Month, is an opportunity to celebrate the rich culture and traditions of Native Americans while recognizing the tremendous contributions that Native Americans have and continue to make to the United States. Whereas Native American Heritage Month has been advocated for and observed in many communities since the early 1900s, and nationally and officially established in 1990. And whereas Native Americans have long called Maryland home before the first American colonial settlers, and whereas despite a painful history marked by unjust federal and state policies of assimilation and termination, Native American people have preserved. And whereas the city of Hyattsville celebrates the culture and history of all Native peoples, including members of the Maryland state recognized tribes, the Piscataway Indian Nation, the Piscataway Conoy tribe, and the Accohannock Indian tribe. And whereas the values and spirits celebrated this month are ones that resonate for Americans of every background and heritage, including respect for the natural world and the flourishing of future generations. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the city of Hyattsville hereby proclaims the month of November 2022 as Native American Heritage Month, and all residents are encouraged to learn about the lasting legacies of the original inhabitants of what is now the United States. So with that, I really do thank you for this time.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Sandino. And now I just want to take a moment to introduce Sutin, a spoken word poet, member of Black and Indigenous Solidarity Organization, and senior PR of Freedom, Justice, Equality of Myanmar. Sue is a Burmese traditional herbalist, activist, martial artist, spoken word poet, and neuromuscular therapist. She wears many hats. Poetically, she's the first Indigenous woman to represent the state of Maryland in HBO's Brave New Voices International Youth Competition. She's the winner of Editor's Choice Award, sponsored by Poetry.com. She's mentored students with Do More Baltimore. She was a judge in the International LGBTQIA Poetry Slam in 2021 and was a judge in the International World Women's Poetry Slam in 2022. Sue is an intersectional activist that has worked with American Indian movements to help change the Washington football team name, and has worked with Black and Indigenous solidarity groups to raise awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women's movement. She recently helped write a bipartisan bill called the Burma Act with her USACM Freedom, Justice, Equality for Myanmar organization. And Senator Ben Cardin, she's helped to send $275 million to aid Myanmar people suffering from genocide. And so with that, I welcome you, Sue, and thank you.
Sorry, I didn't know I was on mute. Thank you for that warm introduction. You can call me Sue, it's easier to pronounce. So I come from Myanmar, and we are over 130 nations. And I come from the tribe of Bama, but I love working with local Indigenous folks. So this poem right here is, it's a bit intense. It's about white supremacy. So please don't get offended. This is just my perspective. Okay, it's called Haka on Your White Supremacy. I wish I could squirt blood out of my eyes like a lizard does for protection. Sometimes my frustration and white ignorance gets carried away, but I rather bloody your little white lies. Bloody delusional in your white privilege bliss bubble, your white cotton trying to damn us, damn our menstrual flow from which you came. We came from bodies bloodied with ancestry, yet brown people are deemed too emotional. I would posit that you are too apathetic. Your families have participated and you're still profiting from Native genocide, enslaved Black people, treated Black people subhuman, lined them up, auction block these beautiful Black people, tell them they're ugly generationally, force a standard of beauty based on you, sell body parts, tear apart families, silence their languages, take away their religion, dangle hope of white Jesus saving them. Hope is a nice carrot. Keep hope alive, but stop doing. Keep hope alive, yet atrophy educational access. Keep hope alive, yet let's feed my students nutritionally deficient food. Keep starving my students with your white wonder bread. Keep hope alive and stop promoting critical thinking. Keep hope alive, yet stop reading government policy. That's too confusing anyways. Let's distract everybody with social media. Keep hope alive, people, but Black people are being murdered back then and now. Your white noise is microaggressions. You know, many of my friends are filled with questions. Black people relying on Ancestry.com to decipher their own heritage, line them up, enslave these slanted eyes. They're expendable. Hammer clinks on the side of railroad in the West. The clinking sound became a racial slur for Asians. Pat yourself on the back for your white wit. Asian bodies are still buried underground under the railroads that they built, but they're not considered real minorities. Look at their success. We're not proof of your melting pot working. Ugh, it tastes like every man casted as a sidekick, but never a lead. He's only good for sidekicks. He's used for comedy relief. Give Asian characters to white people with tape around their eyes. Ugh, it tastes like Keanu Reeves playing Buddha. Ugh, it tastes like middle school. Sue, join math club instead of spoken word poetry. You're not a real minority, and this program's only for real minorities. Line them up. Cut native hair in the 1700s, deem their culture savage, steal native children, ship them to boarding schools, silence native language so the next generation will forget how to communicate to their elders, trade their moccasins for your loafers, make racist headbands around their heads in elementary schools. Your Thanksgiving is based on massacres. Do you know on Plymouth Rock, every Thanksgiving, some of my friends mourn and honor their ancestors. If it's so equal and about gratefulness, then how come in Thanksgiving meals, there's nothing native in the menu? I thought it was two cultures coming in for a meal. Was Thanksgiving another white lie? Divvy up their land after you steal and plant a flag. Further down the generations, your ancestors will continue taking the remaining land, bulldoze native people's graves for fossil fuels. The XL pipeline is currently leaking as I speak. Trail of broken treaties, fallen tears, and now pipelines are melanin. Our activated charcoal chests turned into diamonds with all that generational pressure, the weight of oppression. You said our expression is aggressive. Our diamond voice box cutter cuts with precision. Our expression deemed too violent. Our expression matches our daily experience. You want to continue taking and appropriating minority cultures. I want to haka you out of your veiled racism. I want to Kali your white supremacy. I want to ignite your apathy in Pele's volcano. I want you to carry your internal and generational oppression. I want to drown your subconscious oppression in the clarity of Yamaya's water. I feel juxtaposed. I want to be optimistic in your potential. I want everyone to truly be equal, even you who are oppressing us. You who are benefiting from white privilege, I simply and wholeheartedly want everyone to find peace. And I am not a martyr, enlightened or fully balanced. Not all medicine tastes sweet and is welcoming. I will no longer be your on-call teacher. Don't gaslight me with my own culture. Don't explain away my rape and how I'm attracting rape vibes with my karma. How if I was a little bit more bodhisattva, if I was a little less angry, I build a bridge. I cannot speak delicately all the time to placate your guilt. I'm not even asking you to be guilty either. I'm just asking you to reflect. Is there something in the way of seeing yourself clearly in the mirror? Thank you.
So thank you so much. That was so powerful. Hopefully that spurs us all to think deeply as we move into the panel. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I will take a moment for us to recognize all of our panelists. Oh, excuse me, our speaker, Juanita Cabrera Lopez, who is Executive Director of the International Mind League. I will introduce Ms. Juanita. Juanita is Maya Mam and originally from the Western Highlands of Guatemala. She's a survivor of the internal armed conflict in Guatemala and a former political refugee. She now works with Maya leaders and elders through their traditional institutions for environmental protection, recognition of land rights, human rights, cultural preservation, and education. Juanita's work with Indigenous peoples has focused on the full and effective use and implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Her emphasis is focused on the right of self-determination and collective rights to lands, territories, natural resources, and the environment. She holds a Master's of International Public Policy from Johns Hopkins School. Juanita, please welcome.
Juanita. Good evening. My name is Juanita. It is an honor and pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you so much for that amazing gift of words and poetry and really speaking truth on so many Indigenous peoples. I want to give thanks to the City of Hyattsville Race and Equity for this invitation, and I also honor the lands that we are on and the kinship that we have with Piscataway Nation. The Maya people are currently a huge population within particularly PG County. And one of the first peoples that welcomed many of us who were displaced during the internal conflict and genocide, not just in Guatemala, but in other countries in Central America, in this region were actually from Piscataway Nation. Many of the elders that I have had the pleasure to speak with and to learn from, such as Chief Billy Tyak, always would say, we are one people. We are relatives across borders that have been imposed on us. And I will never forget those teachings that I had the honor to hear directly from Chief Billy Tyak. And so I always carry those teachings and honor the lands and the peoples that are part of also our extended family. So thank you so much for welcoming us here. I'm a member of the Mam Nation, which is one of 22 distinct Maya peoples in Guatemala. And in the last couple of years, this region has really been a welcoming region or a place of final destination for many unaccompanied minors, many asylum seekers that are actually Indigenous peoples. And so we really want to emphasize that even if we cross imposed borders within Turtle Island, or what many of us call the Americas as Abya Yala, which is a Guna term of a land of fertility and in constant youth and a living land. Many of us have seen that as we become displaced because of imposed policies and of transnational corporations stealing our lands and stealing the goods of Mother Earth, as we saw at Standing Rock, we are now forced to migrate, oftentimes in horrendous conditions that we leave from our home countries, and then a particular migration journey that is characterized by us being Indigenous, our identity, our gender, the languages that we speak. And when we are forced to cross these imposed colonial borders, for many Indigenous peoples from Central and South America, where our identity is erased and we become misclassified as Latino or Hispanic. And so one of the things that we do want to stress, especially within this framework of Native American Heritage Month, is that there are Indigenous peoples outside of these US colonial borders, and that there is actually a diversity of Indigenous peoples, not just throughout Abya Yala, but globally. And so it is really important as we think of this celebration to think about the complexities and the diversities and the beauty of this diversity within Indigenous cultures and Indigenous peoples, and also to recognize that many of the youth that are in our community are Indigenous youth from different Indigenous backgrounds and different Indigenous nations. And oftentimes, because of the circumstances that their families endured, do not grow up learning their Indigenous heritage for a number of reasons. And so it's always important in our work at the International Mayan League to root our work with youth and leadership around identity development and grounding ourselves in our culture, in our cosmovision, and language revitalization, because these become pillars to make our community proud of being Indigenous. There has been, I think, so many centuries of colonization and oppression and state-sponsored genocide against Indigenous peoples that for many of us, hiding our indigeneity was a form of survival. And so now as we move into really celebrating Indigenous identities, we also want to make sure that we're not only focusing on, and that was my timer, on the genocide and atrocities that are part of our history, but looking beyond that, because we are not defined by colonization or by genocide, but we are really trying to articulate with our community, what does an Indigenous future look like, where we are thriving and living in beauty and creating futures that sees us as equals within society. So those are my brief remarks, and it is just such an honor to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words. Next slide, please. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our moderator and panelists and share a little bit about them before we move into the body of our evening. So I want to give a warm welcome to our moderator, Alicia Sanchez-Gil-Freeman, who is co-chair of the Hyattsville Race and Equity Task Force. Alicia is the executive director of Emergent Fund, a rapid response fund rooted in movement building. In her role, Alicia has raised and moved almost $10 million to Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led grassroots organizations, mobilizing in response to COVID-19, family separation, Muslim bans, police brutality, reproductive injustice, Indigenous sovereignty, environmental degradation, LGBTQ+ rights, and more. Through trust-based, community-led philanthropy, Alicia is able to do the work of reparations and land back by moving wealth out of the hands of extractive institutions and into the hands of organizers on the front lines, so that they have the resources they need to build power and heal in the face of relentless crisis. Next slide, please. A warm welcome to Elder Rico Newman, who is elder of the Choctico Band of Piscataway Conoy Indians. Elder Newman has 3 sons, 7 grand and 2 great grand. Mr. Newman retired in 1989 after 28 years of service with various federal agencies. He then enjoyed a career in real estate for 15 years to retire. In 2003, he was coaxed out of retirement to work with the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian as a consultant, then cultural information specialist from 2003 to 2009. As a tribal historian and researcher, he has spent many years participating in civic university and tribal forums, developing a history and academic curriculum for tutoring tribal youth. Next slide, please. I want to give a warm welcome to Tiara Thomas, who is the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs Education Committee Chair. Tiara is an enrolled member of the Piscataway Conoy tribe. She currently lives in Charles County, Maryland. Tiara represents the Piscataway Conoy tribe on the Maryland Commission of Indian Affairs. She works closely with the Charles County Public Schools and has been the parent chair for the Title VI program for the past 3 years. She is also a parent liaison for the Charles County Public School Educational Equity Task Force. She is passionate about working with her community to ensure that there's a foundation for future generations, and she believes that education is a large part of the building blocks to creating a just future. I want to give a warm welcome to Mr. Peter Brooks, who's a member of the Maryland Commission on Indian Affairs. Peter Brooks represents the Choctico Band under the historic Piscataway Chiefdom at the Maryland Commission for Indian Affairs. He is currently teaching a class on stress reduction techniques for veterans to the Maryland State Arts Council. He leads guided meditations online and produces advocacy videos and games to educate and promote Native American culture, history, and spirituality. Peter also produces powwows through the Native American House Alliance in Philadelphia, where he works part-time. A member of the Eastern Woodlands Territory Support Group of the American Indian Movement. Warm welcome to Mr. Brooks. And finally, a warm welcome to Aiden Alston, who's the president of the University of Maryland American Indian Student Union. Aiden is a senior at the University of Maryland, majoring in public health science. She's a member of the Nottoway Indian Tribe of Virginia and currently serves as the president of the Native American and Indigenous Student Union at the University of Maryland. She has held internships at the Whiting School of Engineering at Johns Hopkins University and the Health Plan Product Service Administration at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, California. Upon graduation this spring, she hopes to work as a clinical research assistant while she prepares to apply to become a physician assistant. And so I am going to ask for Elder Rico Newman and Ms. Tiara Thomas to share some reflections on the history and culture of Piscataway Indians, the first people of Maryland. And next slide, please. We'll get to the first question. So who are the Piscataway Indians and what happened to them? And Elder Newman and Tiara, I'll let you all take the stage.
Okay, I usually let ladies go first, but she might let the elder go first.
I'll let the elder go first.
That's a loaded question, to say the least. We could be here a while talking about who we are and basically who we aren't. One of the things that we impress upon people is that most know us by the name in our language, which is Piscataway Conoy Indians. But when you translate that word, Piscataway Conoy, it translates to people who live where waters blend below rapids. If you look at the earliest treaty signed by our people, 1666, you see a plethora of different tribal leaders signing on that treaty. But it wasn't long before the English decided that they didn't like that. They wanted one person to deal with. And they interrupted, disturbed, and modified our system of governance that has been having issues ever since. And by fiat, they decided that the Tayak would be like a king. And they even addressed him with those kind of titles. And I believe it was 1699, when the Tayak decided he could no longer explain the abuses of the colonists to his people, he decided to leave, which was a very difficult thing for him to do, to leave the land of his ancestors and to get away from the type of intrepidations that were taking place. First went over to Virginia, and then the Virginia colonists said, no, you can't stay here, as though they were trespassing on colonist lands. So they went to what's called Heater's Island, which they assumed was outside of Maryland's jurisdiction and outside of Virginia's jurisdiction. But where they will find out later that they kept getting visits from members of the Maryland legislature to come up and try to tell them to come back. And they simply wouldn't because they were not going to address any of the things that needed to change in order for them to feel comfortable in coming back. And there's a lot of history between the coming of the colonists in 1634 and the Tayak leaving in 1699. We're talking about in a 66-year period. That's a very short period of time. And when you're talking about time, that's just not even a drop in the bucket. That's vapor. For them to have been pushed natives off the land to create such a diaspora in that short period of time. 300 years later, here we are. There's a resurgence, and thankfully that started, and we have a debt of gratitude to the African American community for kicking up the dust back in the late 50s, early 60s, and getting attention to the fact of some of the misgivings going on here in the state of Maryland. And thanks to that, we were able to come together, and it took a while. There was still some disputes. There's something about trying to get back what you lost that causes differences, especially when people have different ideas and different interpretation of what happened, and who should be doing what. And but the communities were able to come together and pursue um, 5 different governors, trying to get them to um, recognize the fact that no, we are not extinct. We're still here. Things have happened to us. No, we don't ride horses. We don't wear leather and feathers. So, a lot of people see us that we're invisible. But ultimately, we were able to prevail. And one of the major reasons we needed that, if you looked in Maryland's Code of Maryland Regulations during that period, if you wanted any benefit within the state of Maryland, I don't care how many taxes you paid or didn't pay, for you to have access to any programs and projects in the state of Maryland that may help you and your family to meet your needs, they had a little caveat in the regulations. If you identify as American Indian, you either had to be a member of a federal or state recognized tribe. If you were not, don't step up, don't sign up. There was nothing available to you. Um, I know it was back in the 70s. I had at a meeting of business, I had a lady to tell me that back then I had hair in a ponytail. And, with my name, Rico Manuel Newman, right? She said, why don't you sign up as Latino? You can get on. No, I am not going to have y'all serving me bologna sandwiches in Baltimore's jail for fraud. So that didn't pass. But anyway, we still endeavor to persevere. There's a lot going on now, and we could be here all day talking about that. But I'm going to pass the feather to Tierra and let her give you some information on us.
Thank you, Rico. As Rico said, he spoke a lot about our past. I'm going to speak more about where we are now and where we hope to go. We are here. We're all throughout the state of Maryland. We're in other states. We have had a time trying to relearn our language, relearn our history, and then make sure that it's told through our eyes and not through the eyes of others. And so, my parents always told me who I was, and they knew who they were because of their parents, but not all of our tribal members have been afforded that. So even some of our own members are having to relearn their history and relearn it properly. Which is why I believe education is going to be the groundwork for that. And starting in our schools, again, I live in Charles County, so Charles County Public Schools, which is the territory where a lot of my ancestors were at. We were here, and throughout Southern Maryland. And when you start talking about heritage areas, Southern Prince George's County, Charles County, Calvert County, St. Mary's County, those are the areas that we're talking about. That you can find a lot of rich history within those counties of our history. And so making sure that starting at the Charles County Public School level, that we're getting those truths out there to our children. Working with different partners, even partnering with the University of Maryland as of recently, to try to make sure that we continue to have our history ingrained in Maryland's history, because they're not separate.
That was quite powerful. Thank you to you both for just sharing some of the past, presence, and hopefully when we move on to the panel discussion, we'll get into some of the futures of some of your perspectives and what you want to see. You can go to the next slide after this, and then the next slide after that. And so I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that these panel questions are inspired by the National American Indian Museum's Knowledge 360 project. We will be providing resources for you all to not just take in what you're hearing today. Thank you, Elder Newman. Thank you, Tiara, for just giving a brief introduction to something that we could spend so much time learning about. We really encourage you to continue learning far beyond today. And so I will take this opportunity to pass the mic to our wonderful moderator, Alicia, and panelists to get the conversation started. Next slide, please.
Wonderful. It has been such a gift and a joy to listen. Tetsu, thank you so much for your grounding poetry, spoken word, and radical truth that you shared to really ground us in this space. Councilmember Sandino, thank you so much for sharing the proclamation from the city of Hyattsville. I think that it speaks to a lot of power of Native and Indigenous people to see stories, Native stories reflected in the city's policies, right? And in the city's like acknowledgement of Native, not just history and past, but also Native futures. Juanita, thank you so much for sharing about the global solidarity of Indigenous people. And Elder Newman and Ms. Thomas, thank you so much too for grounding us in the land that we're on right now. And so with that, also want to just acknowledge that as Councilmember Sandino named earlier, we do want to just pay respect to the Indigenous people who have lived here and stewarded this land for generations from time immemorial, who have had their just land stolen by colonial forces. And so we honor the Piscataway, Conoy people and all of the tribes and nations who have been a part of this land's history. And also we know that land acknowledgements and just even acknowledging the folks on the land is just a beginning of the conversation. It really is such an invitation towards more introspection and more action that is in solidarity with Native communities. We want to look beyond land acknowledgements really, and really looking towards being in right relationship with Indigenous people and the land, and the restoration of land, power, and resources back into Indigenous hands. So with that, and with that honoring of the history and contemporary struggles and the generational organizing and resistance of Native communities, we really work at the Race and Equity Task Force of Hyattsville to be good allies, to be good neighbors, to be good relations to Indigenous people of this land. So really grateful to share space with you all today. So I want to start with the question, and I might just point this question towards Ms. Alston, Ms. Thomas, and Mr. Brooks just for starters, but anyone is welcome to answer. But I would love to hear from you all. What does it mean for you to celebrate Native and Indigenous Heritage Month? What have celebrations looked like for you?
If I can jump in.
Yeah, please.
I think that, the key word, as you said, is acknowledgement. When I do a land acknowledgement, I actually do the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address so that you actually experience how Indigenous people acknowledged the land and each other and the place where we are. And it's like an orientation to life. And so just acknowledging that the words you spoke, the proclamation that you presented in Maryland's history, these things are very, very rare. They don't happen that often. And so it's as a result of Native American and Indigenous Peoples Month. All of these people have come together. I'm sharing the stage with these incredibly brilliant people who I didn't know before this event. And so that's why it's so important, because we open the door, to this history and this culture and this thinking and these people who have so much to contribute. And that's all.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. And I have no doubt too, Mr. Brooks, that this is also because of the incredible organizing and people power of Indigenous people who have pushed to make sure that we do not forget stories and history. So thank you for that. Ms. Alston, Ms. Thomas, anything that you want to add about what it means for you to celebrate Native and Indigenous Heritage Month?
For me, I just think it's really meaningful to be able to share my culture with the world. Actually a sign of progress we've made. Because I think about listening to stories from my grandmother growing up, and like she was discouraged from talking openly about her heritage. Growing up in Virginia, there was a point where it was illegal to call yourself Native American. So I just think it shows progress, and maybe small progress, but I enjoy it. I think it's an opportunity to celebrate our culture and inform the public about our history. And even if it's only once a year, you know, it's nice.
I celebrate Indigenous Heritage Month every month,
That's right.
but it's nice to have other people participate in that celebration and not just, you know, celebrate me, but celebrate my ancestors and everything that we've contributed to now that is what is considered American culture.
Yes, yes, every day. Native histories and Native futures. Are there any particular ways that y'all form celebration? I know Mr. Brooks mentioned powwows. Are there other ways that you all are celebrating this month? I would love to, I think folks would love to know that.
But one way I celebrated is that, and I'm kind of slowing down on this, is my calendar is full of going to schools and webinars to discuss the presence of not just the Piscataway and other tribes here in Maryland, but you know what's happening across this country. Um, there are separate topics when we talk about education, land back, et cetera, and I guess we'll get to those. But Native American Heritage Month gives an opportunity to bring all that to the forefront, to put it on the front screen, put it on the steps. Um, I know what it means to me. And having discussions with my mom and all of my grandparents were born in the last quarter of the 19th century between 1875 and the late 1800s. And their stories, their parents always told them, you don't ever tell anybody you're a native. And we know that had to be because their parents were during that period of removal. And a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that natives were removed from the state of Maryland. They were sent to an area in Oklahoma called Going Snake.
Right. That's right.
But and again, that's part of our history that's not taught, it's not told.
Yeah.
It pretty much was kept undercover, under the blanket, so to speak. You know, as my mother said, you know, they always told us, said, you know, don't tell anybody that. There's nothing for you to gain from that. If anybody asks you what you are, you tell them you're a child of God, and that should end the topic. So, you know, that's what it means to me is now that I have an opportunity to be loud and proud, you know, to tell people who I am and to explain and explore and celebrate my culture, celebrate my genealogy, my history, my family. Um, so it has a lot of meaning to me. I'm just, you know, now that we have that date in October, got rid of that guy, and the day after Thanksgiving, which is another holiday for Native people, although everybody still looks at it as a day to go out and spend money. Hey, y'all, it's going to be Black Friday. Got any money? Go spend it. So, you know, we want to bring attention to the fact that these holidays are out there, and for the other 11 months of the year, we're doing things so that people don't forget that we're here.
Yes, yes, thank you, Alder Newman. Moving on to another question, I would love to hear your perspective on land acknowledgements. I think, Mr. Brooks, you just you started to talk a little bit about land acknowledgement, but what is your perspective on land acknowledgements? How does the history of colonialism, imperialism still impact your community today? And what does a land acknowledgement have to do with it? I might start with you, Mr. Brooks.
Oh, well, I mean, you know, they are a first step, but, you know, it's a Band-Aid on a pretty big wound. And so, you know, I think it's also incumbent to do something, you know, whatever that is in terms of advocacy or invitations like these, or just asking questions and things like that. So yeah, but Rico is really the authority on the land acknowledgements. He speaks all over, yeah, about them. And you know what he says is that they shouldn't be perfunctory things. They should really be heartfelt and sincere, and moments of real mourning and reflection on that. You know, so like we have a moment of silence sometimes before we lose a leader or something like that.
Other folks on the panel, anyone else want to share?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. You Land acknowledgement, I've participated, and when you look back, you wish you could do it over again. I've participated in assisting a lot of organizations, schools in developing land acknowledgements. And it's for some reason a bulb went off one day in the hand, and I was speaking with a college president who wanted me to do one for the school. And I said, no, no, it shouldn't be me doing it. I know whose land it is. You need to know. And I explained, and I hope I wasn't out of step with this person that, and I probably wasn't. It really didn't matter. I thought truth had to be told. That me giving the answers to this college president is like the teachers giving the answers to the students. Students are required to do research, get the answers, get the right answers. And that was my explanation to this person, that the school administration should do the research to determine whose land they're on, what happened, when it happened, how it happened. But land acknowledgement, like everything else, has a story, it has a history. And I guess you could back this up into how to, why is it necessary? And I look at it that there were three basic fallacies that bring us to this day. The first one, of course, being 1493, when the Pope issued the, what was it, the Terra Carta, that dividing this hemisphere between the Portuguese and the Spanish. And the later crown heads of Europe came and figured they needed a slice of the pie themselves. And we know that in 1634, Calvin and company rolled up in here. He went to see the Tayaguanas at the time. And it started with another fiction. He tells the Tayak, and this is what a priest recorded. So I have to assume that he was not lying. I'll take that as an assumption. That they came here simply to have a place to sit down and practice their religion. And that wasn't asking too much. And but he had a piece of paper in his back pocket, a charter that said, hey, why are you asking to sit down in something that your king has given to you? The entire domain is yours. So it started with that fiction. And of course, the third fiction, Latin starts jumping all over the place. You have the terra nullius and domicilium et vacuum. It means there wasn't nobody here. It's an empty land. Help yourself. You want a couple thousand acres, you need 5, you're going to go ahead and take it. Just get them out of the way. So we had to deal with that. These things happen, and that persisted for centuries. And things started to change. And it basically, of all places, started in Australia. The Aboriginal people of Australia were actually this guy, I think his name was Mabo, M-A-B-O, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. He was able to get a case before the Australian Supreme Court. And at the same time, the UN was looking into these matters about Indigenous people's rights to their homelands. And the Australian Supreme Court ruled in Mabo's favor that they were entitled to their lands, their Indigenous rights to their land. Now, it took a while from 1990s, and you get, I think it was 1970 with the Trail of Broken Treaties that marched into Washington from all over the country and into Washington, D.C. And I remember it well because my wife was working at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Travel Enrollment Office, and she was one of those that was caught in the building and couldn't get out. So, and if you have time or the inclination, go to that and look at the document that was prepared and given to the United States government as a means of bringing this thing to a conclusion. And the government accepted it. These 20 things on this sheet, you can go online, we have this thing called social media, you can get all this stuff. Those 20 things that the government agreed to, not one has been carried out. Here we are, 50 years later, they haven't been carried out. And that's shameful. but if we endeavor to persevere, we keep moving on. And then and heading toward the year 2000, land acknowledgement starts coming out. Canada was one that kicked it out, and where they had uh, something that was passed with the First Nations people up there, um, to give them a rights to they have a right to occupancy, but Canada wasn't giving back any land. If you were on some and they could put some boundaries on it, which, I tell people now that word boundary does not exist in either the Algonquin language or any other one I can find. There's no such word as boundary. But there are retractors on it. There are those who don't like it. There are those that say this is nothing but another means of political correctness. Um, and others who say, okay, it's performative. At the end of the day, nothing comes from it. You're gaining nothing, etc. But things are moving forward. Land is being given back to a lot of the tribes. The idea and purpose of what's called land grant colleges. People hear that word and they don't know what it means. Um, but if they take a minute to take a look, where did that come from? You go back to the 1860s to, I think it was Senator Morrill, who passed that act, that this money to build these schools was coming from the sale of native reservation land. They didn't need all of that. The minerals that were being extracted and being sold off to others, the money coming from that was going to build institutions to educate people to no benefit to Native people. And after the freedom of the slaves, and I said, well, wait a minute, we have this animal called segregation. They can't go to these colleges and universities. And they were big problem. We could probably have all heard or read about the riots in Baltimore, Chicago, New York, Boston, because the freed slaves were coming and taking these jobs from the white yeomen. And, people don't do critical thinking. Wait a minute, how could they take jobs? You have to stop to realize that slaves were very talented people, tailors, shoemakers, barrel makers, carpenters, masons, husbandrymen. They were talented. You watch any of the three great horse races now, look and see who's handling those horses. The owners go near the horse want to bite them. Horse don't know them. But the handlers, I'm not going to look and see who the handlers are for these thoroughbred horses. And so that continues to this day. But then after the end of slavery, they said, wait, we have to build some institutions. So they built all these land grant colleges all over the country, particularly in the South, et cetera, and a half for the specific benefit and a half for freed slaves and for others. But again, this is not a history lesson, but I'd like to plant a seed for people to think beyond the obvious and the immediate and find out where does this stuff come from. And I was blown away and surprised now that the University of the District of Columbia now is a land grant college. Okay, so now we have another seat at the table to enjoy some of the fruits coming from the sale and from the mineral rights coming out of native lands. But still and yet, now it's not to say that they haven't built some schools for natives. They certainly have, especially where there were boarding schools. They have built universities for the tribes that existed on those lands. That is not and is not happening here. But I'll kind of back off of that right now and just say that I don't want to see land acknowledgement stop. You keep, it's just like the server. You got to keep at it. You got to keep plugging at it. You got to keep saying it. I don't care if you see it as being what they call it, performative. Keep performing it, and in spite of those folks that said, hey, there's nothing coming from it, there is something coming from it. You just have to look for it. I hope.
Thank you so much, Elder Newman, for your brilliance and insight, and also, like a little brief history lesson for all of us and for the folks watching. Just a reminder that this will be recorded, so you can go back to this and look up some of the stuff that you're sharing, some of these dates, some of these charters, and it also just kind of reminds me that this is a country built off of stolen land, stolen labor, stolen lives, and many, many broken treaties. And many broken commitments to our communities. And so thank you for lifting that into this space. And we have a responsibility collectively to make sure that this country and this government keeps its word on what was promised to Indigenous people. And so I'm really excited at some point in this conversation, perhaps to talk about like how folks show up in solidarity for the demands of Indigenous and Native people of this land and global Indigenous sovereignty. So I'll move on to question number 3, if you can believe it. And the question is that because of Indigenous Peoples Day in October and Native American Heritage Month, sometimes ill-informed Thanksgiving celebrations in November, learning Indigenous history is often restricted to the fall. Tiara, you kind of alluded to this, but why is it important for Native American people and culture to be represented in education in public spaces year-round? And I might ask Ms. Thomas and Ms. Alston, both coming from kind of an educational perspective, to talk a little bit about this.
So for me, again, going back to Maryland's history is our history. So if you think about the curriculum in Maryland, 4th grade, 8th grade, and 10th grade is usually when you're learning either US history or Maryland history. However, right now, we're not included in that history. Or if we are, we're a footnote and it says, it always ends with a period, right? It always ends with, they were here, they're not anymore. And we are. We're living in your communities, we're thriving parts of your communities. So a big focus of mine has been, especially in Charles County, because that's where my kids are in school, that is, you know, working with the equity task force, the educational equity task force, and talking about in-service training for their teachers, talking about rewriting textbooks, talking about not ending the sentence at, you know, at a certain point. And so, but that comes with having to constantly gently remind, like, you know, my daughter was in class and she was in 8th grade last year, and she had to remind one of her teachers, like, you're wrong. Like, no, that's not how that went, you know? And they were learning about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, right? So even how we were thought about in some of those founding documents of the United States, right? We have to change that language. We have to change how we're looked at in that conversation. And I'm always going to tell my daughter to make sure that she stands on who she is. She's proud of who she is. And if you have to be the one to raise your hand and correct your teacher, by all means, I'm gonna stand behind you. So, and then taking that from, okay, now we're out of the K through 12 space. How do we take those same students that are in K through 12 and make sure that when they're going to universities and the university systems within Maryland, that education is continuing? Because again, we want the child to be well-rounded in different colleges and things like that, and what different areas of expertise. And that's maybe where, you know, we're trying to make some leeway. You know, we have some colleges that are interested in having that conversation and interested in including our heritage and our history in their schools. But we got to get there.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Thomas. And as a parent of a small child too, I'm just so grateful for your advocacy to make sure that our children know their histories and know the histories of the communities that we're in solidarity with. So thank you so much for your leadership and work in our communities. Ms. Alston, speaking of universities, talk about, I mean, you are the president of the University of Maryland College Park's campus's Indigenous and Native Student Union. Can you talk a little bit about how this has shown up in your work and in your own leadership as president?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go back to elementary school, but
take us back.
Yes, you know, I really think it's important that Native people and culture are represented in education and public spaces year round, because a lot of people have a very limited understanding of our population and our existence. And, you know, I recall even as a young child in elementary school, friends being shocked when I tell them I'm Native American, because they thought, you know, based on the classes we had, that Native Americans no longer existed. Like she said, the sentence always ended with a period. It's not like nobody talks about what our population faces today. And I also recall attending a summer camp where they had a play, and the topic of the play was a spirit stick, the legend of the spirit stick. And as a young child, I remember oh, I'm picking up on these Native American themes. And I was excited because I thought oh, we're learning about my culture. And I remember telling my counselor oh, I'm Native American. And she responded very quickly, we all are. And I was just remember feeling so shocked and like upset, like going home upset, like just confused, not understanding what she meant by that. And I think both of these incidents made me realize that the rest of the world has a really uninformed perspective of Native Americans. And I just think, you know, schools need to work a lot harder to like remind people that, you know, we're still here and we're entitled to equity in all aspects of society during all seasons. So.
Yeah, I want to drop in one
Yes, please.
really
Yeah,
powerful
please
piece of
don't.
knowledge that just kind of came upon me. It's just something to think about in terms of the orientation of Native history. You know, the Haudenosaunee government founded in about the 1100s, all right? This predates the British government by about 200 years. And since the government of King Solomon ended with Haile Selassie in Ethiopia, that makes the Haudenosaunee government the longest running, continuously operating government on the planet. Every other government has either been colonized or overthrown in some way. And so this is the level of appreciation that we have to have for Native history.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, and I think to your point, Mr. Brooks, like so many governments have modeled ideas about democracy, community on these like traditional Indigenous practices. So thank you for lifting that up into this space. I have another question for you all. And this one is a little bit more kind of present and maybe future thinking. I would love to hear from each of you perhaps about just the number of issues that have come front and center in the public consciousness for Indigenous communities as of late. I'm just going to name just a few of them. Locally, with the renaming of the Yahentumitsi dining hall, and that's at University of Maryland, which maybe Ms. Alston, you had something to do with, but also regionally, the renaming of the Washington football team to the Commanders, and then more nationally and internationally, land back and sovereignty, long-standing movements, missing and murdered Indigenous women's campaigns. On this slide for guests and folks who are with us, you will see a picture. You see the slide of photo activists, and there are folks protesting. And so I think that part of what this slide does is just like remind us that not to Ms. Thomas's point, that Indigenous people, Native people are here right now. And for as long as people have been colonized, people have been resisting, right? This is not passive, right? Folks have been organizing and have been activists from the time that we first encountered colonization. And so I would love to hear from you all, like what are the Native or Indigenous issues that are really speaking to you right now? And how can folks watching get plugged in to local, regional, or national efforts to show support and solidarity to your communities?
So I can get start with this one. So Yahentumitsi, that was just you know, they did the grand opening of that the first of the month. Mr. Brooks, as well as some of our other tribal members, worked really hard. Not Mr. Brooks, Mr. Newman, well as some of our other tribal members worked really hard, and the inside of it is amazing. Being a part of those conversations and learning a lot from each one of them, but also working on a new history course for the University of Maryland is something that we're both involved with as well. But locally for me, I'm gonna say having people support Senate Bill 825. And what that is going to designate Southern Maryland, so Southern Prince George's County, Charles County, Calvert County, and St. Mary's County as a national heritage area. And so by doing that, we already have a Southern Maryland heritage area that has been working very closely with the Piscataway tribe, but putting some of our history in those areas and making sure that our story is told as part of the story of Maryland. So to me, that's something that, you know, if anybody wants to support that, I would absolutely love that, because we need to make sure that our story is being told. We need to make sure that because, you know, knowledge is a gift, and I want to be able to pass that gift down to future generations. And so always thinking about the generations ahead of me. By having that designation, we would be able to, one, be one of, I can't remember if it's 36, I'm not sure what the number is, national heritage areas. And so us already having a Southern Maryland heritage area that's not at a national level, but working with our tribal members to make sure our stories are told.
Wonderful. And just to, for folks who are listening in, that again is Senate Bill 825 to designate Southern Maryland as a national heritage area. And I'm sure we can look it up, but I can also kind of dig around and find if there's like a website where folks can sign on to anything. I will make sure to like let folks know that as well. Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Others, Mr. Newman, Mr. Brooks, Ms. Alston, other things that are really anything that you want folks to know about and be involved in.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at these photos, and the one where there was a demonstration at the former Washington football team. A lot of us stood out there and had on our bully woolies in their hand to stop them freezing out there. And some of the fans coming by us, with some of the insults and things that they threw at us, when I saw what went on at January the 6th, I said, I know how those guys feel, having that come at you. I mean, people had to restrain some of the fans from basically coming over like they were going to physically assault us. It got a little nerve-wracking, but thank goodness there were enough people there to prevent it. Plus, there were some very large Native guys there, starting with my buddy Pete Lindetos in the hand. That he should have been on the offensive line in the hand with the team. But that was something that was done. It was like the water rights up in the old Northwest, and the hand they were fighting for. And I see the one with the young lady with the hand over her face. People don't understand the depth and the meaning of the hand, the print of the hand. You see it all over Indian country. And now it's being used to bring that fact to attention of people, the murdered and missing Indigenous women. I've been watching this series that comes on Hulu. It's called Alaska Daily, I think. It's finally a show out there that's dealing with this issue. And it's showing some of the frustrations that that these tribes have to deal with. They're trying to resolve some of these cases. It's absolutely horrific that this isn't being done. And of course, Yahitamitsi, that's an achievement. And as Tierra said, now we're working hand in hand with Maryland University to incorporate our history into some of its curriculum, and hoping it will ultimately pan out to either being a minor or a major course in hand for accreditation. I hope.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Mr. Brooks, Ms. Alston.
So,
Hi. So yeah, Peter, Big Pete definitely protected me when there was a few interesting people when we were getting petitions signed for changing the Washington football team name. But and also I would like to give some statistics out there for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So Indigenous women are 10 times likely, women and girls are 10 times more likely to be murdered than all other ethnicities in the United States. 4 out of 5 Indigenous women have experienced violence, according to the National Institute of Justice. And more than half Indigenous women have experienced sexual violence. And so in May 5th, 2019, the White House proclaimed officially the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And a couple of, and it's not too far out for Maryland. There was a case where there was a Lumbee woman that was missing. And because of litigation, because Indigenous police cannot prosecute non-Indigenous folks. And sometimes it goes through this loop where the FBI doesn't take charge because they think the Indigenous police is going to do something about it. And then it just goes and nothing really happens. And so I would like to give different resources. There's one where nativewomenswilderness.org/MMIW. That's a really good resource. Another one is MMIW USA. There's no data that is being taken for Maryland. There's no chapter for Maryland, but what does happen is that Facebook website, they take their own personal data, and with all the money that's donated, they give it to the families that are in need, searching for these women and girls.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sue.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that data. And I just want to also acknowledge that we do have the city of Hyattsville has like support for, I wouldn't say that it's like Indigenous centered necessarily, but there's a diverse group of people who can answer hotline calls. So if kind of the data that you've heard in this conversation maybe bring some stuff up for you, some feelings, we can also maybe share. I'm sure Shakira would be able to share kind of information about how to access resources as well. And we'll kind of compile all of this information to make sure that we have access to it. Because I know that sometimes also just hearing this data can be really hard when you know that your communities are under the threat, not just of interpersonal violence, but state violence as well. So thank you, Sue, for lifting that up.
I think Tiara mentioned my name because, you know, in terms of the dining hall, because she knows I'm her biggest fan. I think she is doing a fantastic job. And by the way, we're both here not as members of the commission, because if we were, we'd have to speak on behalf of the entire body. We're here as just individuals. So that's also clear. But looking at the dining hall, you know, Hyattsville, so many great men of Maryland in the community there, you know, Keith Colston, Chief Francis Gray, Maurice Proctor, Mr. Richardson, and Rico Newman. You know, we're here. Hyattsville, I believe, has invited us to present like this, which is also unique of all the other cities in Maryland because of the work of Rico Newman, who has been such an advocate for so many years. And as she pointed out, played a key role in that dining hall becoming named like that, and even the design of it and the things that went in it. And so just so much honor and respect that we have for this elder, and to let all the young people know who are watching this that you can give your life to your people and still, you know, live to be an old man, live a good life, you know. And so I'm just grateful for the lesson that you provide for us, because I think the challenge in terms of looking at this is this issue of invisibility. You know, my family are proctors, but we come from another part of the state. And so for all these generations, we lived within the Black community. And if, just as Aiden said, and Rico, if we ever said anything, no, you're Black, do not tell people you're American Indian. You know what I mean? You're going nowhere by doing that. And so, you know, and we would look at ourselves and say, we're just different, you know, we don't really fit in. And so that is a really difficult challenge, as Sue was saying, and Juanita, this idea of identity, you know, and like Juanita said, the TIAC tells us that you are our elders, our grandfathers, you know, from the Mayans. And so, you know, reviving all of this history, bringing it back to the forefront, the issues that are important to Native people, you know, getting behind them, murdered and missing women, bringing this issue up, and the football team and other names and stuff like that, making people a little bit uncomfortable, because Native people have been uncomfortable for a long, long time, just like we saw with Sue. But there is room for everybody. I mean, we're also very nurturing, generous, healing people. I mean, we could give you all the land and just take little reservations and still thrive. You know, you got everything, and you know, and so you know, these things should be inspiration for people. And here in Maryland, we don't have a proper museum. We don't have a senior center. We don't have charter schools. We have nothing, you know what I mean? Virginia even made a park for all the tribes to interpret their history, one state park, you know? Give some of this land back to the Tayak and to the tribe, and let them program it and tell us our history in any way that we can. And as she said, it's a very urgent thing. We can't wait for just October and November. It's got to be 12 months, you know, until we feel that sense of equilibrium. Because the one thing about Native people is always our duty to seek the harmony and the balance, you know, the right spot for longevity. And so that's the role we play. And it's difficult to find roles in this society for Native people, very difficult. And so that's my issue, is this issue of invisibility.
Thank
you so much. And we haven't heard from you. I would also, Juanita, you know, we're talking about both local, regional, national, and kind of global Indigenous struggles. I would love to hear from both of you about kind of what's bubbling up for you in terms of what you want people to be paying attention to and ways that folks can show up in solidarity for Native communities.
So one issue that I've just been focused on as president is just Native American and Indigenous representation on college campuses, especially at UMD, because if I'm being very honest, next year, once me and my vice president, Jeremy, leave, the organization will likely be dead. So while I think that the naming of the dining hall is fantastic and exciting, and I know that they're planning to open a cultural center, I don't think that they'll have Native students to use the cultural center or to enjoy the dining hall. So recently I've been looking into scholarships and resources that other Big Ten schools offer, because there's a Big Ten Native Student Conference every year, and every year we go, we're always the smallest group of students, and I've always wondered why. And it's because all these other schools, while they're not fantastic at what they do, you know, they have a lot more resources and scholarships. So I think eventually, once we get all that information together and decide to present that to our administration, we're going to need backing support of.
Aiden, I can kind of jump in there just really quick. I've actually been talking with the recruiting staff at University of Maryland about doing more targeted recruiting, and specifically Charles County, but we definitely can look at, you know, other counties as well. Again, I'm just in Charles County, and on the other part of that is I know that we have Indigenous students on campus that aren't identifying or don't know how to interact with the Native Student Union. So maybe we can kind of, you know, work together on some of that.
Yeah, that would be really great. Because we finally got a list of students from the university who identify as Native, and we plan to email them all and just send out, just so they can join if they would like to. So.
I love that. Look at y'all both building connections and communities in real time. We love to see it. Juanita, can I turn to you and maybe ask if there's anything that you want folks to know about?
Sure. So thank you so much for, you know, about the mascots, and we also were there, and it certainly is a cross-cutting issue in terms of so many of our peoples across diverse Indigenous nations always being used as folklore, as mascots, as relicants from the past, only museums. And so it's so important for all of us to continue to bring home that we are living peoples, that we aren't extinct, that we have dreams and building futures for our generations to come. So that's something that, you know, is definitely an issue that we're familiar with and have supported. And in terms of missing and murdered Indigenous women, one of the ways that we have supported the movement, as well as Indigenous peoples of diaspora, is trying to raise awareness that this epidemic does not stop at the border. If we look at the rates in Mexico, Central and South America, we see high femicide rates of Indigenous women, particularly around defense of our lands and territories. Many of the women in our peoples and communities are being targeted because we are defending our lands against encroachment of development projects. But oftentimes we're not within this larger conversation because, again, of borders that impose labels, and oftentimes our communities are so in crisis mode across the board that sometimes it is difficult to forge solidarity across movements. But on the other hand, we see what happened at Standing Rock in 2016. And we as a Maya Nation did send a delegation to Standing Rock to show that we understand what was happening at that moment, because we too have been and continue to live at these moments in defending the rivers and defending our lands and defending against agribusiness. And it's really continuing to be a grave situation. But what all of these movements and all of these contexts have in Hyattsville is the following, is that there are about 5,000 to 6,000 Maya people in PG County. But going to the erasure of identity, we don't show up in data. From self-reported community leaders, we're hearing that it is about 5 to probably more than 5,000 now who identify as mom. So what this has meant is that we need to look at inclusion and getting accurate data. We were left behind during COVID. So the Maya League team was out working with partners from the health department, from Giant, doing vaccine outreach in our languages, doing media work in our languages because our community doesn't speak Spanish. We've also been working with the newly arrived Children's Working Group of PG County to look at ways in which unaccompanied minors, who are largely Indigenous peoples from Central America, how their needs and rights should be addressed. And so it is also really wonderful to see that PG County is thinking about this, because PG County is one of the highest receiving counties in the country in terms of Guatemalan displaced unaccompanied youth. So these factors that seem like they're so far away in terms of our country and ancestral lands of origin actually have very local consequences in terms of even the diversity that we see here in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But again, PG County has some of these highest numbers through community mapping that we've started to do, but is missing within official data from the county level. So in terms of some of that movement, we are trying to make inroads, but it is a huge process. But there is a large invisible Indigenous population that is growing from Central and South America.
And if you don't mind if I add,
Oh, of course.
the same with the Myanmar population. There's a lot of people escaping the genocide that's going on in Myanmar, and they are flooding into the US. And since we're 130 tribes and we don't speak the same language, let alone English, there's a lot of people coming in, and there's no data or census that's being taken. Some are coming here under like special parole visas, or people that are escaping and they're reporters, or they're women and children like coming from genocide. And it's really interesting how everything is so interconnected, because we also have a huge issue with femicide, from that to missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's the same type of narrative that keeps on going on all over the world. And because that is weaponized, and when folks get over here, it's a whole nother story. So Indigenous people around the world, it's nice to have this type of solidarity and able to have this platform to talk about. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you all so much. You all are really just reminding, I hope for me and also for the folks who are watching now and will be tuning in at some point, just the power of Indigenous voices and the power of Indigenous solidarity across the world. So thank you all so much for being here. I know we just have just a couple of minutes left. I don't think there are any questions in the Q&A box. I don't know if anyone has any. Oh, wow. Reed Nelson, our neighbor, Reed Nelson says this was a very good panel. So maybe I'll just read this out loud for the panelists and then for anyone else who might be tuning in. There are many Native Americans from across the country living here in Hyattsville, including 9 members of the Navajo Nation, 3 of which are my grandkids who attend public schools here. They are told all the time, even by staff in schools, that they cannot be Native American because they must be lying because they're all dead. They are told repeatedly that they must be Hispanic and why can't they speak Spanish? Then they're told there must be Asian. Please help us explain to Hyattsville residents that Native Americans live among us. We are here and we want to be accepted and respected. We don't all live in teepees, but we do live in houses right beside you. And there are hundreds of us here in Hyattsville. Does anyone want to respond to that? That might be a final word as we close out, that Native people are your neighbors. Tiara, I'll turn it to you for maybe the last word until Shakira closes us out.
It breaks my heart to hear that.
Yeah.
But I know that because I'm not gonna give away my age, but I wasn't in school that long ago, and I have kids that are in school, so I do understand what it's like to have people say to you, "Oh, you can't be what you know you are," and to say that, you know, in Charles County we have a Title VI, which is called the Alaskan and American Indian Education Program. That program used to exist in Prince George's County, and it no longer does, but I would love to get it back. We've been working for the last couple of years to try to get it back. We have to have 10 families to support and say that they will participate to be able to get that back in Prince George's County, and that's kind of been where we've been stuck at, is getting 10 families to commit to that. So if we're ever able to get, you know, those 10 families, I'd love to make sure that we could get that program back in Prince George's County, because I went to school in Prince George's County.
Wonderful. Something else we can collectively advocate for Title VI here in Prince George's County, making a mental note for the Race and Equity Task Force to think about this.
Well, I think,
Peter,
you know,
I'll turn it to you, Mr.
One last thing, when we started it, we emphasized that we are all family. We are all related. Tawinima is the word for family in the Lenape language. Tawinima, which is the language we use, and so in this area. And so that's a good language to learn and to remember. Tawinima, family. We are all related, and that's what we're asked, is that you consider us as part of your family.
Thank you to all the relations. Thank you so much. And Shakira, I'll turn it to you to close us out, but thank you. Just another moment of gratitude to our panel, for your brilliance, your vulnerability, for your lessons, for your insight, for your wisdom, and for the survival of our people, your people, and our collective solidarity. I'm so grateful to be in community with you, and so humbled that you would share your Friday evenings with us and with our neighbors here in Hyattsville. So from myself, Alicia, on behalf of the Race and Equity Task Force, just bowing in deep gratitude to each of you for your time and wisdom. And I'll turn it to Ms. Lumiere for our final words.
So much gratitude. I couldn't have said it better. Just want to give a final thank you to our esteemed guests, our moderator, Alicia Freeman, Mr. Rico Newman, Mr. Peter Brooks, Ms. Tia Thomas, Ms. Aiden Alston, Councilmember Sandino. Thank you so much, Ms. Juanita Cabrera Lopez. Thank you to the City of Hyattsville, the Community Services Department as well. Some thanks to Deputy Director Sherry Everhart. Thank you so much to our wonderful and powerful performer that's within. And many thanks to the Hyattsville branch of the Prince George's County Memorial Library System for providing us with so much information and resources. Sherry, if you wanted to just take a moment to share about some of the resources that we will be sharing.
Unmute myself. Yeah, so some of the resources that we will have a page on the city website under hyattsville.org/ let me pull this up because it's going to be on the screen for you. Hyattsville.org/NAHM. So all the resources that we've discussed this evening will all be included on that page, including information that was provided to us by the panelists and by our guests this evening. So all of that will be there along with the recording of this this webinar and a list of reading resources that was provided to us by the Hyattsville branch of the Prince George's County Memorial Library. They were very gracious in putting together a pretty extensive list of the books that are available in their branch, as well as in ebook format for children and adults.
Yes. Well, thank you so much to all of you that have been with us this evening and all that are listening in the future. And I think we might be able to close out with a treat if Mr. Brooks is still willing.
Sure. I'll just do a push-up for you, and you guys can, check out as you want. Thank you again. Thank you. Way,
2 minutes.
yeah, hey, hey, way, yeah, hey, hey, well, way, yeah, hey, 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 well, way, hey, well, way, yeah, hey, hey, well, way, way, yeah, hey, 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 well, way, hey, well, way, yeah, hey, hey, way, yeah, hey, hey, well, way, way, yeah, hey, 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 well, way, hey, well, way, yeah, hey, hey, well, way, way, yeah, hey, 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 well, way, hey, well, way, 2 push-ups.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Thank you to all of our panelists and performers. Thank you to the city of Hyattsville. Have a good night.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Hey, let's not be strangers.
Yeah, bye, friends. Yeah.
Yes.
Hey,
I can't wait to connect with everyone.
I
Hi.
know.
Yes.
Wow,
Hey.
Juanita.
Hey.
Aim. And I get to work with Ciara. Y'all should be jealous, I'm telling you.
I'm so jealous.
Good night.
And
Sherry's like, I'm gonna have
Councilman
to stop the
Sandino,
recording.
thank you. Usually politicians just come and then go. They're like, I did my part, man. But thank you for staying. What an honor. Wow.
Thank you. It was an honor for being in this space with all of you.
Hey. Oh.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, so
Good night,
grateful for
everyone.
council member Santino.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Peace to Way. We'll see you all again.
Oh, thank you.
Bye. Take care, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Sherry, that was really just
That was, oh my gosh. it was hard for me not to like get choked up a couple of times during this. This was so fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm so happy.
Me too.
I am going to turn the recording off.
Oh.